there, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about the Tod Slaughter collection, or it's called The Criminal Acts of Tod Slaughter, which is this nice little box set from Indicator, where you get 8 films and a booklet. So you get this nice booklet here, where you get articles and slaughter, plus you get things he said of himself and critical response to the film. You also get the 8 films, so you get 2 to a disc. So you get Maria Marten and Sweeney Todd. You get The Crimes of Stephen Hawke and Never Too Late to End. Then you have Ticket to Leave Man and Sex and Blade Hooded Terror, Face at the Window and Crimes of the Dark House. Now, I'm not going to lie, some of these are better than others, but they are better than their reputation has been for years. For years, Tod Slaughter was viewed as the kind of low-budget scare monster of ill repute, by just generally and what was basically horror critical community, and generally, if you heard of Tod Slaughter, it was like, yeah, he made those low-budget horror films, sort of like Lugosi in the 40s, that kind of where his reputation was. And a lot of the films, when they were re-released, were in terrible condition. Had not been restored. There was nothing. You couldn't see the details. All you got was Tod Slaughter doing a stick. Now with the restorations, you get to see the films as they were made. These were quarter quickies, but they were done with some budget. They were shot in Pinewood mostly. They were shot with good technicians who are professionals. So they were going through a system of filmmaking, and you had some up and comers who would go on to do better things, like Eric Portman, the actors, and Ronald Neame being the DP for one of the films. So there were films where people could learn the craft a little bit before they would go up and do better things. But they were fun in themselves. I mean, some were better than others, really. I mean, that's a big thing to take away, is some are better than others. I'll go through the titles first, and then Right. I went through them, but I'm going to make sure I can see them so I can tell you which ones are the better ones. Right, so it started off with Maria Marten and the Murder of Red Barn in the Red Barn. Now, this is a fun one. It does have the kind of creaky thing of, it was a play, it was made as a play, because Tod Slaughter had been going around theatres for years with these plays, like doing the Barnstormer plays. He had a kind of theatre of other actors who understood these plays, understood how to play them. He started off as the kind of playing the kind of boring leads, boring kind of innocent people, but then he found his panache when he went to play the villain. He was much better than the villains, and especially he had a name for it. Slaughter actually was his surname. So he'd been well known in London and the provinces for touring these plays all around Britain, basically, for years and years. So he's well known, well liked. So when the quarter quickie system came in, they needed films to fill it. So Tod Slaughter was a perfect thing of, you could make films with him that they could do it at a lower budget, and you could quit in the quota system, and people knew the plays that they were based on. They'd already done versions of these plays before, but with Tod Slaughter, doing a Tod Slaughter one, people who had either heard of the plays with Tod Slaughter starring in them, or they'd seen them, so it was much more of a selling point. So he managed to get 8 films made with George King, who was the producer director. He produced all of them, but directed some of them, and so this lasted till basically the war started. So Maria Marten was the first one, and it is very enjoyable, but you do get a sense of they're still figuring it out a little bit. Like, how do you adapt this play to this film? It's still a bit stage bound. There's still a sense they haven't quite got the pacing right of some of the things. Like, certain scenes are great and other scenes are going a bit, but they're trying to make sure that stretches out to 17 minutes. It has to be 17 minutes or 65 minutes to be one part of a double bill. So they're, in some cases, especially the early sections where you're doing the setup for for the story. Sometimes they can be a bit long in some of these films. And in this one, it's fine, but it's the other films in this set I liked more. But it's still a really good start. Slaughter's on form straight away here as the villainous squire who's manipulating everybody and, you know, up to no good. I mean, Slaughter's characters tended to be evil, villainous people who no one could see through because they were supposedly, like, presentable professionals, even though they behaved terribly behind the scenes and had all these, like, sidekicks who are helping them do their dastardly deeds. I mean, he was a full-on villain always. Like, he never tried to suggest any decency. It basically Dick Dastardly in live action. That's what Tod Slaughter was. And obviously I think he kind of was a linchpin from the kind of Victorian melodramas to the kind of the new versions that would come up after World War II. Kind of Tod Slaughter was like an in-between guy to transfer some of the stuff that would go on to the Bond films, but not everything would go on from the Victorian melodramas. He was kind of in the middle there just before, as one ended, another one started. So Maria Marten plays a squire who gets a girl pregnant and has to kill her, and then all hell breaks loose and eventually he's found out. Very simple story. It was a big hit. As a play, the film did well, so it's like, oh yeah, we can do more of these Tod Slaughter films. So then they went to the one of his famous plays. Like, a lot of these films are based on the plays that were going around the provinces over time. I mean, there was one original, but most of the time they were based on plays that people knew. So next time is Sweeney Todd and the Demon Barber, Fleet Street, which was, again, a very typical subject matter. People knew the play. The play was very bloody, but in the film they couldn't do that because of British censors. They had to suggest it rather than show it. So this film is not the best Sweeney Todd film. It's enjoyable because of Tod Slaughter, but it takes a while to get going. Slaughter's good, but the thing that always drags these down is the story of the young man who Slaughter's always going to, you know, frame for the, you know, basically the person he's picking on. The love interest who Slaughter's always after always has someone she's in love with. So whoever's the love interest of the woman is always going to get tortured by Tod Slaughter in these films. And it depends on who's playing it and what the setup is of whether these scenes work or not. In this one, it's fairly boring. It's a guy who doesn't have any money, has to go out to the world and prove himself, which means he's away from the film for a while. You see he has to travel far to make his riches, then come back, and it's something that happens in these films as well. But in this one, it's less interesting than Sweeney Todd himself and what he's up to. So those scenes become a bit of a drag. In the first one, Maria Marten, Eric Portman plays a dull young man, and because Eric Portman's a good actor, that works a lot better because he can add some spice to it. The guy in this one doesn't really work. He's just a nobody. But the scenes are fine with Tod Slaughter, and Tobias has, you know, the young kid who's meant to be helping him in the shop, who's always sent out to buy a pie whenever Tod Slaughter's going to kill somebody. And you get his sidekick who's turning the bodies into pies to sell to people as well. Everything's there, but some of the stuff that the cannibalism has to be kind of toned down because people can't take it. Apparently, even though in the actual play, they would actually have lots of blood. They'd sell pies after, in between the first act and second act to the customers, and everyone was in the joke. But apparently in film you couldn't do that. So then they went to what's one of my favourite of the films, The Crimes of Stephen Hawke, which is an original. This was the one where he did not adapt anything, any play. It was an original thing. With Tod Slaughter plays the spine breaker. This guy who goes around robbing people and breaking people's spines if they get in the way. But by day he's this mild-mannered old looking guy who's, you know, looks very frail. He's a moneylender. He's got a daughter, and he's viewed as a very nice person by everybody. Again, Eric Portman as the guy playing the romantic rival of Tod Slaughter. Again, because it's Eric Portman, he's a good actor, so these scenes have some sort of interest. Also because Hawke is actually found out halfway through the film by Portman, and the second half's a manhunt for Hawke by Portman, and it's them like avoiding basically Slaughter avoiding Portman and trying to avoid the authorities and everything else, and also his daughter's getting eyed up by a local rich scumbag. You know, there's lots of fun stuff. There's also the fact that a child gets killed in the first 5 minutes of the film, a very obnoxious child. You know, a rich guy is killed not long after it, and it's one of those things where, because it's based on original material, they can have more murders early during the setup, and it just goes on bigger as a quicker paced film. But you don't lose any of the fun stuff, because Slaughter gets to play the frail cover identity, but also play the evil person who breaks spines, and he's having a ball. This is kind of where, in some ways, his film career really gets started. The first two were a bit theatrical. This one really delivers. This one's really goes at a high pace and is really enjoyable. Then he moved on to what I thought was one of the weakest films of the set, which was It's Never Too Late to Mend. And the problem with this film, one thing I find that the Tod Slaughter films are kind of like Star Trek movies, where it's good one, weaker one, good one, weaker one. It's like, it does feel like there's an order to them. It's like it's almost like they do a good one, then the one after that maybe not put as much effort into, then they realise that other one wasn't so good, so they better put a lot bit more effort into the next one. That's what it feels like sometimes. This one is based on a novel that's turned into a play. And again, it's the problem of the romantic lead is away for most of the film, just like in Sweeney Todd. And so basically there's no real through line of threat. Tod Slaughter on this one plays a guy who's in charge of the prisons, as well as being a local lawman, and he enjoys being cruel to the prisoners. So it's a movie about the awful like prison conditions in the 19th century, based on a book about that subject matter, and mainly it's about that. And so there's lots of scenes of people being treated horribly, but it's a very paceless movie. It's the idea of these people try to survive the prison service and some of them dying in the service, and there's jokes about the fact that there's only been 2 deaths this week and things like that. So there's lots of interesting things on, and Slaughter's really enjoying playing a guy who's a total hypocrite, who enjoys torturing people and being rotten to them. And if you go to prison, if you start out with a rebellious character who starts out and then goes through prison, and it does a lot of bad stuff to him, and it really destroys him. And later on, when you get back to Tod Slaughter stuff, where he's plotting to steal a fortune from a guy who was his rival, who went away and made his fortune, it's much more like a Tod Slaughter film. It's much more enjoyable again, but you've had the trudge of these scenes that feel very formless for the first half of the film, or the first 2/3 of the film, and it feels like a film where you have good scenes, but that overall structure doesn't suggest any forward momentum. It just feels like it's a bunch of scenes that have a general structure, but they're not been planned out for like dramatic escalation in any possible way. Which in other films, there's always a sense of things getting worse, things getting worse. You had a slow start, but things would get worse and worse and worse. And in Stephen Hawke, it was things started out bad and get worse and worse and worse. This one, there's less. The progression is much slower, and I found this to be one of the more difficult ones to sit through, mainly because of the pacing. There's still really good scenes in it. It's just like it feels like there was it just needed more work in the script before they started. Then we go to another one of the better films, Ticket to Leave Man, which is all about the problems of men who come out of prison. So they follow up the prison idea. Where this one, Tod Slaughter plays a guy who's basically is a criminal. They're trying to hunt him down. He's committed all these crimes. The police don't know what he looks like. So, but he falls for this woman who's engaged to this other guy who's a bank clerk. So Slaughter basically sets this guy up to take a fall, and the guy does his time in the prison. He comes back out, but can't get a job anywhere, and he has to lie to basically get a job in a bank. And Slaughter wants to actually rob that bank, so he knows this guy, you know, as a guy who he thinks he can manipulate so he can rob the bank. And it's one of those ones that really works, because you have a set up earlier on where Tod Slaughter and his sidekick are awful people. They frame a poor guy for nothing. I think the guy's doing well, and suddenly they frame him, steal his money. They use his money to set up this fake business that Slaughter can use to expand his criminal empire while the guy's been in prison. And then just once he's out of prison and he's trying to get his life back together, they keep on torturing him, and you find out these guys are manipulating the ticket to leave system to hide identity of people who have lied to get a job after them out of prisons, and they just blackmail them to say, look, if you don't give us money, we're going to tell the person you're actually a criminal. Or if he doesn't like the person in the first place, we'll just tell them anyway. So he's an awful, awful person. He's also robbing places, and he wants to rob this bank, and it works out wonderfully, because you have a guy who's really put upon, and he's put in these terrible situations by Slaughter through the whole film, so you're with him the whole time. So it's one of those things where the guy who's playing the boring lead is actually an enjoyable character, just like Evan Portman played that kind of lead. You have someone actually fighting back against Slaughter and actually making sure the drama's more balanced. So that's what works better. So yeah, Ticket to Leave Man is the nice surprise in the box set. It's a one that the title is the one you go, that looks like a dodgy title, but it's one a really solid film. Now we go to Sexton Blake and the Hooded Terror, which is another one of the weaker films. It's part of a series, Sexton Blake series. Sexton Blake was this guy who was a character who was basically the cheap Sherlock Holmes for a while. He also lived in Baker Street. But the character adjusted through the time, so sometimes he was more like he wasn't as much of a sleuth as Sherlock Holmes. A lot of times he was just bare-fisted. He was a fighter, you know, less than a person looking for clues. And that's when they're trying to make him a Holmes clone for the films. The problem is that the clues are so obvious that only an idiot could not spot the clues. And the film is it's really unbalanced because the guy playing Sexton Blake is a plank. He's just boring. His sidekick is boring. It's basically all about the villains. Whenever the villains on screen with Tod Slaughter and the sidekicks, it's fun. You get to see weird stuff with that. Whenever it's the lead Sexton Blake, it's boring as hell because the guy's a moron, and you cannot get behind him at all. You want your villains to win, so you have half a film where you're just bored to tears. Another half is it's Tod Slaughter. You know, it's like it's that kind of thing where the actual story is pretty dull. The villain's good, but the actual setup to get to the villain could have been figured out really easily. And there's a clue to the location of the villain's lair that's so simple that it's like, if you're meant to be a detective, how do you not spot it? There's another thing where he's never heard of this gang, who's apparently the most famous criminal gang in the world, and your hero hasn't heard of it, and it's like, So it's one of the scripts that was just kind of bland. I don't think it did as well as they hoped, because the film itself wasn't that good. So I mean, they'll try to set up Tod Slaughter as a returning villain for the series as it was going forward, but it just didn't work. So Slaughter went back to his usual thing of doing adaptations of plays, and he did the Face the Window, which is sort of like Ticket to Leave Man, where there's also another bank involved, and like Ticket to Leave Man, it's also one of the better films because it just goes for it. It kind of does remind me of Stephen Hawke as well, in the sense of it's got forward momentum the whole way through. There's always something happening. There's always a enjoyable sense of build to, and then the next thing happens. It's as a pulp thing where everything's always moving forward. So you get these people dying and these robberies taking place, and there's always the suggestion of there's a face at the window that horrified everybody and made them drop dead with fright. And it turns out, no, it's a face at the window scares them, and then Tod Slaughter comes in behind them and finishes them off. And Slaughter is basically making his fortune by stealing the money from these people and putting the blame on something else. They don't know it's this other guy who's doing it. So he's built up a name for himself in the respectable world because he's got money, which he stole. But he still ties to the underworld. You see him going to this bar, the underworld bar, with all these cronies who are all evil men. One of the bank clerks, when the bank was robbed, is very kind of suspicious of Slaughter, especially Slaughter's eyeing up his intended girlfriend, who's a daughter of the guy in charge of the bank. And of course the guy in charge of the bank would not want a clerk to actually marry his daughter, because that's not the way things are done, because this guy has no money. So there's all those complications, but basically all hell breaks loose pretty quickly. So that's kind of built up and then just kind of discarded, because it's like we've got more fun stuff to do. Like, the guy's been set up by Slaughter and he has to clear his name, and all the police are after him, and Slaughter's just been horrible the whole way through the film to people, and he's using all his criminals to do all these sorts of horrible deeds. And it's just a blast. It's a total blast. I had a lot of fun with this one. Yeah, just the momentum was much stronger. You had a hero who you actually liked, and who'd been done in by the villain to a degree where it's like, yeah, this is justified him going after the villain. So that's why, again, why it's like Take to Leave Man or Stephen Hawke. The idea of, like, yeah, the heroes have reasons. So that's a lot of fun. Face the Window's a lot of fun. Then it's also got a mad scientist bit at the end as well, which turns out different from what you'd expect from me to set it up. Finally, we have Crimes of the Dark House, which is the Woman in White story done with Tod Slaughter. He plays this guy who kills this guy in the Mediterranean outback who has come into a fortune. He goes back, because the guy's been disappeared for years. He comes back masquerading the guy, but it turns out the guy had lots of skeletons in his closet, which causes problems, including an obligation to marry a wife, an old woman, another woman who he basically impregnated, and is the daughter of that woman that ended up in a madhouse. So suggesting he left the country out of shame rather than a sense of adventure. And so Slaughter comes in hope of an easy ride. He killed this guy. He's going to be the lord of a manor. He's going to be quite happy. No one remembers what the guy looked like. And all hell breaks loose. He has to arrange the deaths of different people. He knocks up one of the house assistants. Has to kill her. Has to kill the mother of the girl who's gone mad. Has to frame his new wife to seem like she's gone mad, because she looks like the young woman who was torturing him, who had escaped the madhouse. Again, there's lots of really bizarre things going on. Now, this is not as good as it sounds, because the first half is dull. Really, the first half takes forever to get going. There's so much setup to get to the good stuff, and it feels like we could have done the setup quicker, and because there's, until we get to the third act, you've got 20 minutes to sort it all out, and it's like this could have been the whole second half of the movie. Instead, you have to do it quick, and the first half's too long. So it's kind of one of those unbalanced films that it is enjoyable once it gets going, but it takes a while to get going. And there's lots of scenes of people spouting dialogue you don't care about. The guy who's the rival in love with Slaughter for the woman is another plank. He's just a nobody. No one cares, and that's a problem. Well, again, you're using him with the villains. The villains are fun. Everyone else is kind of boring. the film gets more interesting the further it goes on. I mean, you get the idea of these various people coming back to haunt Slaughter's character. So it does work eventually, but it takes a while. So it is enjoyable, but you have to get through the first 20 minutes. Because there's some scenes there. Anytime the romantic leads in it, that's deadly. But once you get to the murders and the cruelty and slaughter being slaughter, it's lots of fun. So those are the 8 films. You get some nice extras, some commentaries. Stephen Thrower does an hour-long talk about Tod Slaughter Films. You get stuff from his family. There's lots of good stuff in his box. I'd highly recommend it. It's really good. It's just some of the films are better than others, but they're all enjoyable in their own way. But I would definitely say the Crimes of Stephen Hawke, Take a Leave Man, and Face the Window are the strongest of them. Maria Marten, Sweeney Todd, and Crimes of the Dark House are also enjoyable, but they have flaws. And basically, Sexton Blake and Stubbornly Too Late to Mend are the 2 weakest ones. Again, they're still got enjoyable things. They've just got some script problems that really could have been mended. So, I'd still say it's definitely worth an investment. You probably will get it in a sale pretty soon, because Powerhouse tends to have sales every so often, and it's been out for a year now, and it's a very enjoyable set. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. That's me for now. Bye.